I'm sort of on vacation, a staycation, if you will. And, I've been relaxing by the pool, minding my own business, not getting a haircut. And I've been making videos only when something really hits the spot, something I hear or see hits the spot. Well, my friends, I was watching a Jordan Peterson lecture, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and something really hit the spot. Jordan was going into the difference between the emotions disgust and fear. And to illustrate this, he used the example of Hitler. And the things he said and studies he cited truly blew my mind. And I would not be doing my duty if I did not share this with you. So in today's video, we're going to be watching a couple of short clips from this lecture, and then I'll analyze them. I'll give you my opinions, the soulless opinions you come here for.
One of the things about Hitler was that he was very disgust sensitive, and a lot of his hatred for non-Aryans. So imagine inside the Aryan box, it was all uniform. Outside, it was all parasites and predators. And that was a manifestation of disgust, not of fear. It's a whole different thing. And if you read Hitler's Table Talk, which is a collection of his spontaneous dinner speeches from 1939 to 1942, it's a very interesting book. You see that his metaphor for the Aryan race was a body, a pure body, unassaulted by parasites or predators, and that he was trying to erect a border around it to keep all of that away. So it's an immunological disgust-like metaphor. And there's some recent work that was published in PLOS One about 3 years ago showing that, a brilliant study, should have got much more attention, showing that if you went around and sampled political attitudes in different countries, or even within the same country, what you found was that the higher the prevalence of infectious diseases, the higher the probability of totalitarian political attitudes at the local level.
So Jordan says that Hitler was motivated more by disgust than by fear, which is incredibly interesting itself. But what hit me the most was the study he cited afterwards, where he says that the more prevalent infectious disease, the higher the probability of totalitarian control by the government. And that just hit me like, whoa. We're seeing that right now, are we not? Draconian measures, governors having emergency powers, emergency situations, states of emergency. Do you think that after the emergency, the government's going to give back those powers? No, they're just going to keep extending their emergency as much as they can, as we're seeing. And if the emergency happens to be over, they're not going to give away the powers. Are you crazy? No. Each time we get a little closer and closer to a totalitarian government. And if we could look at history, we could see it happening right now. We could stop it. We can stop it. But let's keep going with Dr. Jordan Peterson.
And you can imagine, well, what happens if there's infectious diseases is you want to put borders around everything. You don't want free movement between ideas or people, because that's partly how the disease spreads. You're going to have much more strict sexual rules, for example, because that's a great way for diseases to be transmitted.
Again, we are seeing what Dr. Peterson is talking about. The stifling part, for example, of sexual contact. How? The lockdowns. Of course, in Florida, we haven't had severe lockdowns because we have the best governor in America. Maybe the best politician in the world. But lockdowns have severely affected the world and America. And not just sexual contact and socializing, but the exchange of ideas. We've seen a rise of censorship. I mean, this guy's saying it to a T. This was released in 2017. Let's keep going.
And before Hitler went on his rampage against the non-Aryans, he cleaned up all the factories. Like, he went in there and fumigated them. It was part of the law. And he went on a public health campaign to get rid of tuberculosis, and he got rid of the bugs in the factories as well. He used Zyklon B. That's an insecticide, and that's the gas that he used in the gas chambers eventually. So first it was the bugs in the rats, and then it was then it was euthanasia. That was the next move, and forced euthanasia. And the rationale for that was compassion, by the way, just so you all know. It's merciful to put these people who are burdensome to themselves and their families and the state, who are living second-rate lives. It's merciful to euthanize them. And that was a huge campaign in Germany. It was after that that the more racial purifications began.
The main point I took from there was that Hitler started as a public health campaign. We needed to clean our society, eradicate tuberculosis. And the goalpost kept moving further and further. We can see something similar happening here Of course, a little less cynical, but we need to eradicate our virus. And our goalposts keep moving further and further. 2 weeks to slow the spread. Mask up until you're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. Sorry, you still need to mask up. We might need more lockdowns. Goalpost keeps moving and moving and moving. Another thing is the rationale was compassion, merciful. If people were a burden to you and the state, then hey, we've got to put them down. People are being treated as second-class citizens. Are we not starting to see that with the unvaccinated? They're not being allowed in certain places, not being allowed to travel, not being allowed back into work. The goalpost keeps moving. By disgust, we're separating our societies. And we're getting a little further and further into cynical and totalitarian territory. Now there's one more clip from this lecture that I want to show you, which is quite important but has a little less to do with politics and more to do with society.
And so that's the disgust thing. That's unbelievably important. It's because lots of times people think that conservatives are more anxiety sensitive than liberals, and that's why they're closed in terms of their ideas. But that doesn't look right. First of all, conservatives are less neurotic than liberals, although the effect isn't that big. So it doesn't look, and they actually are, they score higher in measures of well-being. The most unhappy people are liberal men, by the way. So
now, I'm no psychoanalyst, but I think that the liberal men are the most unhappy because they are not allowed to be themselves. They're not allowed to be men. Why? Because toxic masculinity, which is fake news. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity, the same way there's no such thing as toxic femininity. There's toxic people. That's true. Toxic people exist. But liberal men, at least the stereotype of a liberal man, is a neutered guy. No balls. Snip, snip. So in order to be happy, I guess you have to be more of who you are. But you got to be allowed to be you, which if you're a man, is a man. And what is a man? Well, that's a question for a philosopher, I suppose, which also I am not. So let's keep going with Dr. Peterson.
But, people are often accused, if they're conservative, of being fearful, and that's why they, suppress other people's viewpoints. But that doesn't look right. It's low openness and high orderliness, and that looks like it's associated with disgust, and that looks like it's associated with something called the extended immune system, which is the proclivity of people to keep themselves away from potential sources of contamination. It's really terrifying because one of the things people often said about Germany was that, it was a very civilized country, and yet it descended into barbarity. But conscientiousness is a very good predictor of...
Germany was a very civilized country. How could it so quickly descend to barbarity? That question hit me hard because I'm sure a lot of you as well have heard it a lot here. It would never happen in America. It could never happen here. I've said that myself. The Germans thought the same thing. We must be wary of the past and make sure not to repeat it in the present. Dr. Peterson is a genius. He's been teaching me a lot. Recently, I watched a debate of capitalism versus communism. Dr. Peterson was representing capitalism, and Slavoj Žižek, another philosopher slash psychoanalyst, was representing communism. He's also a genius. Of course, we disagree on a lot of political matters, but the man is brilliant. He asked Peterson at one point, what is all this Marxism that you're talking about? Where's the Marxism today? And Peterson went on to explain, well, the Marxist philosophy at the core is the oppressor versus the oppressed. Of course, with Marx, it was class. It was the capitalists, the oppressors, against the proletariat, the oppressed. Dr. Peterson goes on to explain that today, it's an identity fight. The oppressors are the straight white men, and everybody else is the oppressed. And he's right about this. And it made me think, let's say that we do have this identity revolution, and let's say it becomes violent. I like to fantasize. Let's fantasize. Let's say we have a violent identity politic revolution, and down with the white man. What do you think would happen? As with all revolutions in the past, it's coalitions. And once the revolution is successful, the coalition that gets to power will kill off the rest because they threaten their authority. It always happens, or at least 90% of the time. The most recent one that comes to mind, because I've been reading about it recently, is Cuba. You see, when you read the history books, you see, there was Fidel Castro was the leader of the revolution, and they took over the Cuba, and that's it. game over. But it's not how history plays out. You gotta zoom in. You gotta zoom in a lot. It wasn't Fidel Castro was the leader of the revolution. There were so many different pockets of revolution who were all fighting essentially for the same thing, which was to take down Batista, the dictator, so they could have free and fair elections. And once one of these groups took power, which was Fidel Castro, he was supposed to have elections. But then Fidel gave a wonderful speech, in which he said, "My friends, the revolution has been successful. We will soon have an election. Why do we need guns?" So everyone turned in their firearms. All the revolutionaries turned in their firearms. And what happened next? They all got killed. As it usually happens. Revolutions are not what you think they are. It's a power struggle between a bunch of groups. And usually, the one that takes the power kills off the rest, so no one threatens their authority. And now I'm done rambling. Dr. Peterson is a genius. Check him out. He's going to help you. Be a man or a woman. He's going to help you in some way. At least open your mind. That's it for today. I'm going to go back to my vacation. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Share this one. People need to see this. Peterson's a genius. And the history is alarming. See you next time.